Hi everyone. Welcome to the Wheel of Mind, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. Welcome to season 3, episode 14, where we're still reading Nynaeve Almira's points of view. I'm your co-host, Lajara Dane of the White Oddjaw.
Hi, and I'm Giskel Cimaris, a scholar from Ilion. For any new listeners to our series, I want to remind you that The Wheel of Mind is an in depth character reread podcast. So, by nature, we will drop spoilers at random times. So, this right now is your only spoiler warning. Please read the entire series before listening to this podcast. Now, today we're examining The Fires of Heaven, chapters 49 and 50.
Very long chapter 49, called To Boanda, opens with Nynaeve and our other heroes spending 5 days on the ship to Boanda and ultimately Saladar, a journey that Elaine sped up using channeling she had learned from the Athan Mier Windfinder. It was a dangerous risk, Nynaeve reminded her, but Elaine insisted they were far enough from Samara that Moghedien could not have detected it. However, Elaine was not the only one keeping secrets on the ship. Captain Neris was a smuggler, Elaine had deduced. Not only that, but he was a puzzling person in general. He hated women, and not because he had any other preferences. He had a wife and children, after all, but he generally thought that women only made trouble on a ship, and he didn't want to even speak to one. Tom and Julian made all kinds of oblique threats to keep him in line, and tension was generally high on the ship overall due to the crowding. Both of the women lightened up eventually about the channeling, though, with Nynaeve healing refugees and Elaine working on her Tel'aran'rhiod project. Nynaeve listened to and felt genuine sympathy for the refugees and ended up giving some money to a few of them, unbeknownst to Elaine. She especially developed a soft spot for Nicola, Maragon, and Arena, seeing different aspects of herself in each of them. And when the boat reached Boanda, Nynaeve and crew convinced the captain to keep going until Saladar, where those 3 refugee women were allowed to follow them. Earlier in the trip, Nynaeve had tried going to Tel'aran'rhiod also, but she was too afraid and left very quickly. She woke up crying, but Elaine and Brigitta assured her that she was not a coward. Her fear was reasonable. Nynaeve decided to continue to try desensitizing herself to her fear and try again. She and Elaine both went this time using separate Terran snooping through Elida's study and meeting up with Egwene and Amis. Egwene spoke a little strangely in front of Amis, repeating things that she had already told them in their dreams, and hinting to meet in the Mistress of Novices study after Amis was to leave. It seemed she was hiding some things. Nynaeve and Elaine caught Egwene up on their story too, and after their meeting, the days on the ship passed uneventfully until they landed on a deserted-looking beach near Saladar. And thus ends Chapter 49, To Boanda, at least an extremely brief summary of a pretty long chapter.
Yes, it is a long one reading through it, but there's a lot of fun things that happen here. Now, one of the things we've talked about before with Nynaeve is there is often a disparity between what she thinks and what she says. But
Mm.
what we find is even when she's thinking these internal thoughts and keeping them to herself, her face is speaking out loud. So they know what she's thinking as she is, paying all this money to the ship's captain and working out these details. And uh, Elaine, or I'll just give you a quote from the book. Elaine had no call to ask in that sickly sweet tone if she was having a tooth pulled. End quote. So Nynaeve to herself thought she was being very sweet and reasonable and trying to be charming when she's dealing with this horrible man. Yet, uh, her face was telling a completely different story. And I find that so funny the way it's brought out in the story. And 2 or 3 times this chapter, there are similar things where she's thinking of how terrible that Brigitta is acting, Elaine. If they could only be as reasonable and as sweet as her, there wouldn't be these problems. There wouldn't be this friction.
Yeah.
So I think it's so funny that she views herself so differently, and she doesn't realize, even when she thinks she's being nice and sweet, her face is saying out loud what she's thinking inside.
Yes.
So now, one thing that concerned me a little bit about this part of the story, or about our character in this part of the story, Elaine works out that the River Serpent is a smuggling vessel. Captain Neris is a smuggler.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And Nynaeve doesn't really seem to care. She passes it off as well. We've dealt with smugglers before. course, that would notoriously be Bail Domon, who sometimes was a smuggler and sometimes was an honest ship's captain. He played both sides of that field. But, um, she just didn't think that was a big deal. Now, Elaine, coming from a different background, being the daughter of a queen, saw how people were skipping out on their tax money, basically. They were
Yeah.
cheating the government. And so she would take that a little more personally. But Nynaeve just didn't care. That didn't bother her one way or the other.
Yeah, she's like, what are taxes anyway? I mean, who cares? I mean,
Right.
these rulers, what are they doing for people? Like
Yes.
that, none of that really makes sense to her or matters.
Right, and you could see part of that because of her upbringing. She was Andorran, but didn't know she was part of the nation of
Right.
Andor. They had seen no benefits from it, had paid no taxes. There
Mm.
was no relationship there except that they fell within that area of a map. Um,
Yeah, and even since then, she has mostly seen rulers who receive taxes but don't do responsible things with them, like Amathera. So she doesn't really have a very positive view of taxation by this point, I'm pretty sure.
but she was upset that Elaine had overheard Captain Nereus refer to them as wenches.
Yes.
Understandably so. But I just thought that so funny that she just didn't bat an eye. And so her idea of morality and legality are sometimes a little bit fluid.
They are, and but I think this is also consistent. So it sounds inconsistent maybe to us on its face because we live in a large society that's very hierarchical and we're used to having like multiple layers of people to answer to. Nynaeve isn't, and her sense of morality is very much one-on-one and personal. And we find this early in her story when she clashes so much with Moiraine, who has this like greater good sense of morality and understands some people, individuals might need to be casualties to that. That's sort of Moiraine's perspective. I'm not saying I necessarily hold that view, but Moiraine has an extreme version of that since she's concentrated on preventing the end of the world.
Right.
Nynaeve doesn't understand that viewpoint, and she's always been very compassionate for those individuals who are caught up as the collateral damage in these larger decisions. So she brings really balance to the folks who need to be very focused on the bigger picture, like Moiraine, but we also need the folks who are very focused on an individual level. And so to her, that's an insult to people on an individual level, whereas like I mean, avoiding tax evasion, like she doesn't understand how that connects to individuals at all anyway. Like that's
Right.
not really a big deal. So even though this seems like a far cry from the situation where she's mad at Moiraine for them running away from the burning inn in Baerlon, I think it's still like a more just a funnier, like less serious example of the same morality clashes
Yeah.
there.
I guess it is consistent. At first, I really thought she was losing some sense of right and wrong here. But no, I guess you're
Yeah.
right. It fits more in with her worldview and would be more consistent with who she is. I just didn't stop and think of it that way. But yeah, very true. Very,
And of course, to some degree, Nynaeve's morality system is that hurt my feelings. Therefore, you're not allowed to do it. So,
right. Oh yeah.
there's probably some of that that's also just extremely self-interested and kind of immature as well.
Now, one thing about this chapter too, it did give me a flashback to my teenage years. And
Really?
yes, something that happened to me, I'll share it very quickly. When I was learning to drive, I was in the driver's seat of the car. One of my parents is sitting beside me. We're driving, and I had a sibling in the back seat. And I don't recall whether it was my brother or my sister, but one of them. And I know this is going to be a big shock to everyone. I said something very smart aleck to the sibling in the back seat, and of course, I just knew I was about to get hit in the back of the head. So instinctively, I floored the gas pedal like I was trying to get
Hmm.
away. Now,
Yeah.
it wasn't anything I thought about. It was just instinct to try to get away. Of course,
Uh,
then even my parents are laughing at me. You can't get away from them. They're in the car with you. That was the flashback I had when Elaine uses the one power to speed their passage along, to bring in the wind, to move the ship along its course, to get away from Mogideon.
mm-hmm.
And they don't know she is in
Oh,
disguise and on the ship with them. It's like no matter how
Yeah.
fast the ship goes, you're not going to get away from her. Of course, the difference is they don't know that. We do as the
Mhm.
reader, and that's
Oh.
something that I had even forgotten on my reread that
Mhm.
was the point where she snuck in with these refugees,
Oof.
and
Yeah.
and then later as it gets into it, I think it was after they'd entered Saladar, I remembered who she was, and then of course we had the big revelation when they were surprised by her much later.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I'm not saying, oh, sorry.
no, no, please go ahead.
I'm not saying that I agree with this viewpoint, but I wonder if this is one of those scenarios where Robert Jordan is trying to show us the consequences of different like focuses in your morality, right? So remember the burning in and Barillon and the people whose livelihoods were ruined by that. Um, that was the the sort of collateral damage that Nynaeve was focused on when it came to Moiraine's style of morality. But here we see that Nynaeve's style of morality, this compassion for individuals, which I was really happy to see in this chapter and our previous one, it has this cost and this consequence of letting Mogideon through. If she had
Right.
not let any of these refugees through, a lot of people would have died in Samara, but Mogideon would not have come through with them and not have followed
Right.
them. So,
Well, I don't think Mogideon would have been thwarted that easily. She might
you're
have.
probably right. She would have found some other way. Yeah,
Yes.
I guess the letting the refugees on gave her a pretty
Right.
easy way to do that
Yes.
because there's
Yes.
no way of screening who they are in any way.
Right.
Um, and I'm not saying I have a perspective like that about refugees. I think everybody has like different levels of risk tolerance and like compassion. And we see that in this story. People have different morality systems. So I think Robert Jordan has shown us like the negative and positive aspects of each of those ends of the spectrum.
Yes. I agree.
Being a little too kind of calloused and focused on some bigger picture versus being a little too compassionate to the point that maybe there are some safety risks associated with that.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
but in general, I mean, I like seeing her compassion for them. It really connects us to some of Nynaeve's most positive aspects. She has some really negative qualities sometimes that we talk about a lot, but it was nice to see her like talk to all these people and hear their stories and give them money and just really care about people on an individual level.
But typically, with her personality, at first, when the refugees discovered she paid for their passage, they didn't have to pay anything. Uh, they're coming up, they're thanking her, tears running down their faces. They're kissing the hem of her dress. They're so profoundly thankful because she has literally saved their lives. These people had nowhere to go,
Yeah.
and she's so embarrassed by that. She just wants to sink into the floorboards. She does
Yeah.
not want this kind of attention because that she didn't do it for the attention. She didn't do it for any reason
Right.
except to help as many people as she could help. And she doesn't seem to have done it out of a sense of guilt where she thought this war broke out because of me, because of getting the prophet
Yeah.
and
She didn't
Goliath.
even really acknowledge
No,
that.
no. It's
Oh.
just the fact these people were hurting. These people were suffering. People should
Hmm.
not hurt and suffer. And I do like that inborn sense of right and wrong that most people have, that we don't want people to suffer. And if there's a way we can stop suffering, especially directly by our direct actions, most people will do that. Or at least I would like to think so. I would like to believe that there's that much goodness in people. But in typical Nynaeve fashion, she looks around for Brigitta and Elaine because if they said anything about this, she was going to thump them both all around the ship. So, being
She doesn't know how to deal with a feeling, and
no,
she's gotta externalize
right, right.
it.
And she has to bring this
Yeah.
anger, this bristliness into it.
Mhm.
That okay, you're welcome, you're welcome. These two better not say a word, and I love that. It's so ironic to me and it does really help bring out her characteristics, just how she is,
Yeah.
and
Well, I think it's relatable too, personally, because and I hear this from people who do a lot of altruistic things, but I have trouble accepting compliments sometimes, but especially if it's for something that's like compassionate. Things that I think I do are like, well, anybody would do that in the same situation, which is not true because people don't, but it feels that way. It's like, I don't feel that I did anything
right,
special. This feels like what I was supposed to do, and then I shouldn't get praise for it. And if I do not know what to say to that.
Right,
If somebody just says, "Oh, that is, you have such a kind heart to take care of these cats in your neighborhood," or something like
right,
that, I'm like, "Well, yeah. I mean, I don't want to see them starve.
right,
Why wouldn't you if one just showed up on your doorstep like
right.
that?" No, I guess not. But
It does when you're doing what comes naturally to you or what feels right to you. It is a little embarrassing sometimes for someone to notice and to thank you for it or say something about it. Um, but those uh, those are good things. Those are the good qualities that you love to see in people. And really, by living that out, you inspire other people to do the same things as well. Whatever that act of charity or goodness is, it does inspire other people to do it. And again, like you said, it doesn't mean that everyone is going to. It doesn't mean that everyone is going to react in the same way. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they are sociopaths or bad people. They may be inspired to do
Mhm,
different good deeds or good things. Now, there
exactly.
are those people who will not and who have no conscience to follow. But for the
Mhm.
most part, let other people do the good they want to do, and you do the good you want to do, and it does work out well. But yeah, you shouldn't do it for the praise.
Mm,
Um,
right.
so anyway, and
Absolutely.
on a little more about Nynaeve's, uh, I guess, ironic nature here. Um, there's all this tension that grows between she and Elaine, which of course leads over into Brigitta. There's tension between them two. And they're all stuck on the ship, so they can't really do anything about it. They know that by being bitter or hateful, it's just going to cause too much division because the ship is overcrowded. They're all packed in there together. In fact, there wasn't even room to move on the deck. She had to pretty
Mm,
much strong arm the captain into throwing his goods overboard to make room down in the hold for the people, for many of the people. Um, uh, but anyway, so they start acting like they're nice with each other. They're smiling, they're trying to act sweet, to talk sweet, and I love how it's described that the men, they were just saying things like, "Well, I guess the women were that glad to get out of Samara." They were, they were
mhm.
buying it, and most of the women were looking at them, giving them the side eye because they knew there was trouble there. And Nynaeve even said something to herself, talking about how they didn't apologize for what they'd done, Elaine or Brigitta, and she said this quote: "Had she been as foolish and vicious as they, she certainly would not want to remind anyone." End quote. So again, she doesn't see it. So I love that those two things going on. There is the tension. They're trying to pretend like there's no tension. The men don't see it. The women on board do see it, and they're all staying out of it. They do not want to get caught up in whatever's
Yeah,
going on here. But Nynaeve is as oblivious to her actions as the men are, which I thought was
of
just very
course.
funny that she's the refugee women who are just concerned with living are staying out of this because they see there's trouble, but Nynaeve can't see that she's part of the trouble. Oh,
Yeah. And it's her classic lack of self-awareness, of course. Yet in this chapter, she has some of her most introspective moments ever.
right.
I mean, it's really just a brief paragraph talking about her. I don't want to say favorite, her the refugees that she feels most of a connection with. She talks about or thinks about the parts of herself that she can see in Nicola, Arena, and Marigan. And Marigan's story, we know that's Mo Gideon, and her story is fake.
Hmm.
But she has a story about being into herb lore, and that's the part that Nynaeve relates to. Nicola had a betrothed who sounds a lot like Lan, in that he was kind of destined to put himself into danger and go die for a cause. Except Nicola already lost her betrothed in this process and lost him to the prophet, not to something like, going into the blight or something. But I mean, both of those could be seen as equally foolish, really, ways to try and fight the shadow, kind of misguided. So that is a possible fate for Nynaeve's future.
Right.
Arena, she sees the most of herself in Arena, who hates traveling, but she's doing it anyway because she needs to protect her person. She has a little brother who is off on this foolish quest to hunt for the Horn of Valir. But as she was looking for her brother, she ended up taking the oath herself along the way. And this is such an obvious parallel to Nynaeve having to leave to follow and try and rescue her villagers, but she found herself falling into one of the very same traps that one of them is in. She knew that Egwene was kind of being stolen away to be trained, but now she herself has to train to become Aes Sedai along this journey.
Right.
But so that's just a beautiful moment of introspection. That's like the most we're ever going to get out of her. I think it was. I'm like, wow. I wish we could see this all the time. This flash of insight. But of course, it has its limits.
Yes.
So her introspection only reaches a certain point because when she's thinking about Arena and why she relates the most to her, there's a piece that she doesn't understand, but of course the reader does. She's like, I don't know why I relate to this girl because she's so mouthy.
Yes.
She seems like she's brought most of her seems like she's brought most of her trouble onto herself with that smart mouth.
Right.
She doesn't say it in her stories, but I can clearly piece it together by the things that she leaves out.
Right.
And I don't know that she's aware that this is where all her trouble is coming from. Is just not being able to control what she says to people. And of course, Nynaeve herself is very much the same way and does not see it. It reminds me so much of the way she told that heavily edited story of her fight with Sarandon to
Yes.
Elaine once she finally did. She still left out a ton
Yes.
to make herself still look a little bit better. um, so yeah, it's beautiful, and I feel like uh, these ways that she relates to these women doesn't really come back up. This was just a brief flash of insight that we have during this trip when she has a lot of time to do nothing but think and listen to these people's stories and really can't do anything else. And from then on, Nicola and Arena just become super annoying, and Margon is, of course, way more of a problem than just being
Right.
annoying. So none of those like relatable points
Right.
persist in Nynaeve's story.
Yeah. And in fact, I was a little saddened because Nicola, I remembered a little about her. I did not remember much about Arena. And so I looked up
Mm-hmm.
in the Wheel of Time Companion, the Black Book, and if, of course, was reminded of the role she plays in the story, but that she and Nicola really are cast in a bad light for the rest of the series. It's like you see them as
Yeah.
a little bit endearing at this point of the story until we get to Saladar, and at that point they change enough that you do not like them throughout the rest of the series.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, it's a difficult thing when you're reminded of that and what they go through. And I I could remember that Nicola was one that Nynaeve and Egwene didn't like. I had forgotten that she was the one who tried to basically blackmail everyone. But
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, she tried it with
She's too big for her
right,
britches
yeah.
because she's got the foretelling
Yes,
ability
yes. And she
too.
is very strong on the power, not compared to Elaine and certainly not Nynaeve or Egwene, but still very strong and would have been just an amazing initiate in the tower had she not been outshone by these three and really outranked by them because well I don't know about outranked. She was so um, ambitious. She was always wanting to learn more. She felt like the rules were
Mhm.
holding her back. Yet that's the
Just
exact
like
yes, I
Egwene.
started saying that's the exact description of Egwene. In Egwene's case,
Yeah.
at least Egwene was channeling that towards a greater good, toward
Mhm.
being the leader of the White Tower, being the leader they needed, um, being someone to stand up for the light in these dark times. Um, Nicola was she had the same ambitions, but they were smaller goals. It was what's gonna benefit me right now, not what's gonna benefit the White Tower as a whole and on into the future. So, yeah, the same
Mhm.
ambitions, similar motivations, but very different outcomes, really because of the size of their vision and their focus, what it was on. Is it on doing good and helping people, or is it on just feeding the moment? Um, so yeah, it's kind of sad to look up those two and see exactly where they go in the story. I'm not the
Mhm.
least bit sad by Maragon or how her story turns out.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, Captain Neres is one that is he's he's just some kind of slimy guy. It's like you don't really understand him.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
his dislike of women, as it brings out in here, it's not anything, with a sexual preference or anything like that. He's really got some issues that he needs to work through. Um,
Yeah.
it talks about how, he's got a wife and children and different things, but you, it even brings out that he pretty much stays away from them. He avoids them. He works in order to stay away from them and won't even really look at the women when he's talking to them. So, yeah, he
Mhm.
definitely has some kind of psychological damage that he's just not dealing with and not dealing with very well. But at one point, Nynaeve gets angry enough that she channels, you assume it's little pinpricks of air. He said he slapped at his neck and his hip at the same time. He shouted out. And she says something to him about, wow, the horseflies are so bad this time of year, which is a direct quote from Brigitta when she
Oh,
yeah, when she
yeah.
slapped, was it Julian? She slapped on the back of the neck or back of the head, and then said something about the horsefly. So Brigitta breaks out laughing when Nynaeve does this because she knows what Nynaeve did, and the guy was such a jerk, but because he was such a jerk, she had no qualms whatsoever about basically making him throw his cargo overboard and not thinking he should be paid back
Mhm.
for it. Now later,
Yeah.
Tom brings up, well, you did pretty much steal his cargo. You made him throw it all overboard. He's a smuggler. He's dishonest, but he did pay money for all that, and now it's gone.
Yeah.
And you know, he, Brigitta and everyone else was kind of against her on that because she just didn't think that he was owed anything. Uh,
Right. And it goes back to Nynaeve's very individual level thinking in terms of her morality. So I think, everyone else in the party seems to have some idea of, I mean, what we in like a Western liberal democracy
uh,
might call natural rights, natural human rights. Like there are certain kind of universal principles of like boundaries people have that you shouldn't cross, and so the fact is, whether you like them or not, according to a viewpoint like this, it still would not be right for you to commit theft or destruction of property or the things that they did to this guy. And Nynaeve is like, die mad about it. I don't care. Cry about it. Whatever. Like, he's an awful person. So I just don't have any cares left to
right,
give for him. I've got all these cares that I'm giving to these refugees, but none left for him.
right,
Sorry, this field of cares is just barren. Not going
yes,
to happen. Um, and I again, that probably just goes back to something of her culture and upbringing, where I imagine at the same time, it's like you probably still wouldn't steal anything from the Coplans or Congers, and that wouldn't be considered okay. So some of this is idiosyncratic to Nynaeve and not necessarily just her culture
right,
either.
right,
I think that's important to try and tease those apart whenever we can and not just blame it all on culture, even though to some degree there's some of that
right.
we can use to try to explain her behavior. It doesn't excuse it in cases like this. But I understand that in order to have any kind of larger society, you do need more general principles like that you don't cross. But Nynaeve is probably used to dispensing justice on a more case by case basis, and
Yes,
that's a lot easier to do without much larger general principles in a really small society.
right. And let's face it, human life is far more valuable than any of the cargo he could have carried. And you would have thought it would be
Yeah.
charitable and good and laudable had he decided to throw his cargo overboard or,
Mm-hmm.
stop someplace very soon and sell it very cheap or whatever. Or even, okay, here's some of
Mm-hmm.
this it's food stuff. So let's, feed the people with some of it, just whatever. But
Yeah.
none of that. And it was not his choice. You see, had he made that choice, then you would say, okay, you're proud of this guy, even though he's a sleazeball, he could still make a good choice in this. But it's the fact she forced him to because at first when she suggested
Right.
it, he looked aghast. And then she and Elaine both, I think, started talking about the what excise customs, basically the inspectors at the
Mm-hmm.
different ports. So I bet they would be love to see your papers and all of this stuff. Of course, he didn't have any papers. He had not paid any taxes. He knew he would be in big trouble, and he chose the probably the less expensive of the two. uh, scenarios there. Just throw everything overboard. But it cost him his money. Now, Elaine did give him the necklace. I think it was fire drops or something on it, which I don't think are diamonds. I've never decided exactly what a fire drop is. But anyway,
Oh, I don't. Yeah, I
yeah,
don't
so
know.
she pays him back for it
Rubies,
anyway.
maybe?
Yeah.
Do they ever call anything rubies or
Well,
garnets?
yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
that's
they
just all it
do.
is.
'Cause,
Okay,
I don't
okay,
know.
dang.
I've
Hmm.
wondered about opals or different things with fire drop. I just don't know.
Mm.
Um, but anyway, but whatever the fire drop necklace is, it was worth a lot of money, and Elaine gave him that to pay him back for his lost cargo. But Nynaeve didn't like that idea. She thought that was unnecessary. So she couldn't even really bring herself to support Elaine's decision. So just some of the funny things, as you said, an idiosyncrasy of hers that once she sees that something should be done, you just do it. And if you have to force somebody else to do it, that's fine. You made them do the right thing. So therefore it was a good act, even though that's not really how the world should work, Nynaeve.
Yeah, I think, we there's a couple different ways of looking at this. I agree that like you should probably have some more general principles you stick to. At the same time, that the extreme form of that, like Immanuel Kant's kind of morality system in philosophy, is something like you should have general principles that always apply, is how he thought about it. Like he was not in favor of any case by case basis. So that would be like, you should never lie, even if it would save somebody's life or something like that,
Mm,
which is too extreme for most people.
right,
I think Nynaeve would probably see like respecting this guy's property as a similar issue. Like, really, who cares in the face of people I'm saving. And also just I'm not defending her choice. I am saying that I think she probably has a limited amount of empathy. She's not very good at looking outside of herself anyway.
right.
She is a little self-centered in a way. Um, but she cares very much about these refugees, and she had a limited amount of empathy to go around, and there just wasn't any left for this guy. She's
Right.
like, who cares if the rules are broken? But part of the good part of having rules, um, is that I guess the alternative is if you violate them when you think it's okay to do that, then that opens the door to anybody violating them for any reason.
Right.
Anybody can decide whether the rules should apply.
Exactly.
Um,
If each person,
and I think that is what Brigitta and everybody else is trying to
right.
get across to her.
Yeah. If
Um,
each person interprets the rules their own way and decides when they will and will not follow them, then basically it's chaos. It's anarchy. Everybody can do whatever they
yes.
want
Which
and violate your freedoms and your rights at any moment.
Right, which actually is a lot how the Aes Sedai operate, even though they have strict hierarchy.
Mm,
They are all allowed to interpret their three oaths however they want to. And it still kind of renders them moot because you still can't actually trust what they're saying
right.
or trust that they're not going to hurt you because what they think of as a weapon may not meet your definition of it and stuff like that. So, um, yeah, it's interesting that Nynaeve's kind of wishy-washiness here is actually mirrored by other Aes Sedai, even though on the face of it, it doesn't really look that way at first because the Aes Sedai seem so orderly.
And then we have this moment that seems a little bit out of character when she goes into Tel'aran'rhiod and she comes out and just starts breaking down crying, telling Elaine and Brigitte,
Mm,
I'm not a coward. I'm not a coward. She just breaks down. And the more
mm,
I thought about that, the more I see that's not really out of character for her. Um, and I'll get your take on it in a moment. I'll just share this. It seems like most people, when they try to show a strong face during all these times of stress and troubles, eventually they reach a point when they have repressed too much of that emotion and it comes out. And that's what I feel like happened here. I feel like
yeah.
she's she has kind of
Mm-hmm.
pushed down and tamped down all of the trauma she's gone through up until this point. And it's not that this was any kind of traumatic event. There was nothing to be angry at. There was no way to push this down anymore. And her emotions just came boiling out. I think all of us have found ourselves acting out either in anger or breaking down crying or any number of things that seemed out of character over nothing. But really, it's over a lot of things. And this last nothing was the one that started it, that broke that down. At least that's how I saw it. How do you see that moment?
Well, I think her fear is very warranted. Like Brigitte and Elaine were trying to assure her it's reasonable. I also think I didn't really think about it being bottled up. Like you said, I think before her last encounter with Mo Gideon, she really just didn't have a lot of fear.
Right.
I think she should have and didn't. We've talked about a lot of situations where she should have been more cautious and should have kept her guard up a little more like she had had. But overall, she's never really been that fearful. And she went through something that was so it was traumatic. It's like her body is just reacting without her thoughts really having much of a say in it.
Right.
I feel like it's very much her getting triggered just by going into Tel'aran'rhiod, and that felt pretty relatable. Like it's something where you maybe if you try to reason yourself through it and you think, oh, it won't be dangerous because I'm doing X, Y, or Z thing differently this time, or this is a totally different situation, your body feels like it kind of betrays you and just reacts
Right.
anyway. um, and I never really thought about it being that built up because we have, I guess, since that incident, we have seen her afraid several different times. Whether it was afraid of just, I mean, Brigitte shooting the arrows at her, that was kind of funny
Right.
at the time. We've seen that she actually does have fears, and that's kind of a healthy and normal thing. And it's good to see, too, that this is her reaction instead of just the guilt. I think she's finally gotten over all that groveling she was doing to Brigitte.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I'm really glad that's finally over. It was annoying for everybody involved. So I think that, um, yeah, now that she has worked through that guilt, she still has the very visceral fear. And I don't know. I mean, I can't really think of when she might have really bottled it up. I'm trying to think of times that she put it aside to do other
You
things.
know, typically,
I guess she tries to focus on
right,
anger a
right.
lot, maybe instead when she's actually
That's
afraid.
what I
Yeah, and
started
she's
to
not really
say.
able
Yeah,
to do
she
that.
replaces it with
Yeah,
anger. Yet she has
yeah.
avoided Tel'aran'rhiod for a while, and
Mm.
done what she
Mm-hmm.
could. But after having faced the prophet and seeing how just this madman could take her life at any moment, let me redo that.
Yeah.
So anyway, she faced the prophet just recently, just days before, and see just how mad and crazy this man really is. Her life was in danger. After coming through the battle in the town of Samara on the way to the docks to get onto the ship, um, again she reacts in anger to all of this. But I think the anger is the way of tamping down the natural fear, and not just fear, but all of the emotions you have. We have to remember that emotions are a part of who we are. We shouldn't be ruled by them. We should let our intellect overcome our emotion when we can. But you do have to understand they're part of us. That we do have emotional reactions, and if we don't deal with certain emotions, especially some that can be traumatic, um, then after a while they come to the forefront. That we're overcome by them. So I think there are healthy ways of dealing with emotions that we have, like fear, um, different types of trauma, dealing with stress. All of these emotions, if we deal with them along the way, they don't build up until they reach a breaking point. But if we don't deal with
Mm.
them, they will deal with you. They'll catch up to you at some point in time, because everybody feels emotions. Uh, Most everybody, no matter how tough they are, have cried themselves to sleep at some point in time in their lives. It's just part of who we are. So we have to understand that and acknowledge that, and maybe cut the next guy a little bit of slack when you don't know what he or she's going through.
Mm.
Um, anyway, wow, I didn't mean to get that far off topic, but yeah, I see this as just as her, that internal dam breaking, because she's tried to ignore these emotions and replace them all with anger.
Yeah.
But yeah, that anger is not a one size fits all, and it's not hiding really what's going
Right.
on. All of that came out, and they're right. She had a
Mm.
reason to be afraid.
Yeah, she
Yeah,
really did. But if she still had to go to Tel'aran'rhiod anyway, I'm not sure that they super needed to this time. I could see why she wants to stay in touch with Egwene, but honestly, I don't know. None of that stuff seems to help. They're always just talking about Rand
right.
and not actually. I don't know. It seems like they're interactions really are not that fruitful most of the time,
Right.
except for I guess they found the Saladar information together once.
Yeah.
But anyways, I mean, I guess since this is something she feels she has to do anyway, she did have to desensitize herself,
Yes.
and the only way you can do that is by facing the things that you're afraid of. But there's a caveat to that. I mean, it's something you have to choose for yourself. You can't have somebody doing that for you and it work well without it kind of re-traumatizing you. And you also need to come equipped with some other kind of tools. So some other kind of like plan for what to do when you start to feel intensely afraid. Because every time you just escape, you end up reinforcing the fear and anxiety. So having something other than an escape plan, but maybe a backup escape plan just in case too.
Right.
Some kind of grounding technique, some kind of breathing exercise, any of the like sort of focus the things that they use for training women to channel would probably be helpful. Although Nynaeve has never really used those very well. She uses the blackthorn bush, and maybe she could have returned to that. This is a situation where Rand would have returned to the flame and the void, although
Yes.
he takes that to an extreme
Right.
that ends up not being healthy. But I think there's a middle ground there where I think it's good she confronted her fear, but I think somebody to get over something like this, you have to not only face it, you have to face it with some tools and plans and support that she wasn't doing.
Really, they have no real way to, I think, to explain that or deal with that. The only
Yeah.
psychologist in the world at that time is one of the Forsaken, so you do not schedule an appointment.
Right.
You do not
They're all
schedule that
screwed.
appointment. Right. Oh, man. Well, I think that's all I've got on this one. How about you?
Okay. Yeah, same.
So I'll carry on with chapter 50 entitled To Teach and Learn. Nynaeve was shocked, surprised even, and more than a little angry at the reception at Saladar. They had been brought in by warders, had been hugged by Mendretta Farshaw, or Elmendretta Farshaw, then questioned like prisoners by the Aes Sedai. Most of all that was the galling thought that here she had to obey all of these Aes Sedai, when just that morning everybody else had been obeying her as if she were Aes Sedai. Well, the women only stopped questioning them to confer among themselves, behind a shield of air to keep the girls from overhearing. Nynaeve studied Siwan and Lyanna for a bit, wondering what type of wound was made by being steeled. Wow, she was so curious. And she began to probe just gently to see what it looked like, and was immediately stopped by Sheriam. Nynaeve had forgotten that she was not allowed to channel without permission. The Aes Sedai asked more questions about their story, and they seemed angry and amazed by the things which the girls had brought with them. A seal to the Dark One's prison, a single silver arrow of Brigitta's, and while they had kept Brigitta's identity and relationship to Elaine a secret, they told them that the Panarch had given them that gift. They were still curious about it, and about the Tel'aran'rhiod, more than one, that allowed access to Tel'aran'rhiod. Tel'aran'rhiod was no more than a legend to most of the Aes Sedai. Those items amazed the sisters even more than the stories of how they had faced down and defeated Black Aja sisters twice now, and even how Nynaeve had fought against Moghedien. But what seemed to make them most angry was the Amerlin's letter, which proved that Siwan had sent these three girls out of the tower in search of Black Aja sisters, quote, sending three children out to hunt lions, end quote. But as much as they showed anger at that, they also showed fear at the seal to the Dark One's prison, a seal which was now broken. Oh, it was fine when we put it in the bag. Anyway, that meant there were now only three seals left whole, only three seals holding the Dark One in his prison. There was a lot that they discussed over that, but not much was learned. After being dismissed, they met up with Tom, Julian, Uno, and Brigitta out in the common room. And very quickly, one of the accepted came in and ushered Nicola and Ariana out of the room to be tested. It seems that every girl was tested, no matter how old or young she was. Uno and Tom quietly shared that they had a daring plan to get the girls out of here as soon as darkness fell. They could go to Kyrie and be with Rand. You see, they had just learned that this crazy bunch of rebel Aes Sedai planned to attack the White Tower and pull down Elida. It was impossible. It was madness. They had to get out of here. But Nynaeve and Elaine both chose to stay. Nynaeve so wanted to learn more about healing, wanted it so badly she knew she must stay. She could see from the men's faces that they expected that she would change her mind in just a day or two. Then we had a brief reunion between Elaine and Gareth Bryn, and another one between the old general and Tom, as they squared away old enmities between them with just a few words. Then they were all taken away to be questioned by Siwan, who was not so meek now that there were no sisters around. She demanded to be shown how to use the twisted stone ring so that she could enter Tel'aran'rhiod. Nynaeve only agreed as long as she could study the woman to see if she could find some way to heal being stealed. Impossible.
Well, this is a big surprise for Nynaeve and Elaine to be treated the way that they are in Saladar. It's a huge wake up call. I think those of us who know enough about Aes Sedai could have reasonably expected this, but maybe not our first readers. I don't think we've really deconstructed enough of the mystery of Aes Sedai yet. I think this is when it really starts.
Yes.
So I mean, I could understand why they didn't expect to be bullied so much. It probably feels like this gathering of Aes Sedai shouldn't be as serious. It seems like it could be unexpected that they're trying to enforce the usual hierarchies and kind of tower law type stuff outside of the tower, because I don't know that these girls had any reason to expect that this would be a little tower. All they read was something about a gathering of blues. So you can imagine that they might have expected something more like Moiraines in hiding, kind of doing their own
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
That's the context in which they had experienced Aes Sedai outside of the tower before. And they kind of were ready to just be treated heroes, and also ready to be treated like maybe not equals, but at least adults who can be part of the solution, and for things to really start happening. And even though that notion is dispelled pretty quickly, Nynaeve still decides to stick around, which I was really impressed and surprised and disappointed by all at the same time on my first read through. I was like, yes, please get out of there. This sounds awful already. Like, there's no reason for you to do this. And so much of their time spent in boarding school has been getting stuff done by subverting the usual means,
Right.
ending up getting sent on some mission out of there or breaking the rules in some way, much like the Harry Potter books always
Yes.
go, where they like save the day by breaking the rules and they get rewarded for it. And here we find they don't get rewarded for it. It's not like the normal like YA type thing where that happens. So I mean, we know that Nynaeve is not eager to submit herself to authority. So I'm in awe of the fact that she was so practical and reasonable about the reasons why she decided to stay. She decided she had more to gain, not only more to learn just for the intrinsic value of learning in the way that Egwene is. It's more for this is how I can help Rand.
Yes.
I can't learn these things to help him unless I'm here. I can't learn how to heal madness. I can't, learn how to heal stilling, which she's excited to do. It's really mature of her, honestly, because I think my first thought and my desire would have been to run away from that. Like, okay, we've got means of escape. Let's do it. That's what I have all these boys around me for. They're supposed to get me out of here.
Agree that it is very mature of her, and perhaps she needed to be snapped back a little bit. Needed the drill sergeant in her face to break that
Mm,
pride just a
yeah.
little, not to break her, but to make her stop and take stock of herself and of her situation. So, um, and the Aes Sedai were very firm, but they were not being unjust either. They
Mm,
had to question everything. I think one thing the girls don't understand, what they saw as antagonistic questioning was as much incredulity. You know, wait, say that
yeah.
again. You did what? You fought whom? Wait, you're saying Mogideon is out, that she's not in prison? All of these things that they didn't have this information. They didn't have the background of information that Nynaeve and Elaine and Egwene have. So they're coming at it from a different perspective. And as well, Aes Sedai are used to either having the answers or being able to fake it until they can get the answers. And here,
True,
this entire
true.
group of them who are supposed to be in control, supposed to be in charge of this little tower of this rebel group, however you want to refer to them, they they're just suddenly hit with several things that they don't have the answers for. They don't even have time to pretend like they have the answers. So the first thing they've got to do is they've got to cow these two accepted and make them learn how to snap into line and keep their mouths shut very quickly until until the Aes Sedai can figure out where they stand, until they can figure out what's going on. How can we use this? How is this going to affect us? They were very quick to glom onto the fact that okay, you've got three different Tel'aran'rhiod that can help us enter Tel'aran'rhiod. Nobody's known anything about Tel'aran'rhiod for a few hundred years within the White Tower. They know it's there, but it's an academic exercise. No one knows how to reach it. Oh, wait, you're saying the Aiel wise women do this all the time? Oh, you're saying a lot of them can channel? Yeah, so they're being hit with just revelation after revelation, and the only way they have to control this is not to lift these two girls up on their shoulders and parade them through the city as heroes, because that's a surefire way to make them run their mouths and tell things that everybody doesn't need to know yet. The first thing we've got to do is figure out how we're going to use this, figure out what advantages we have now, and then we figure out how to begin distributing this information out among our group of Aes Sedai. So, it's almost military style planning that, you want to control the flow of information because you know, wars can be won and lost on that. You don't just start throwing things around when there are going to be some spies within the camp. There are things you don't want to
Mm.
lie to learning or knowing about, whether it's just intelligence or some of the new weaves. They were a little excited by the fact that Elaine felt like she could learn to make Terangreal. And even though she hasn't done it yet, she has a strong feeling, a strong connection to them. And she studied them. And so she really believes she can do this if given enough time. I think they were excited by that, but they couldn't show their excitement. And so for me, I
Mm.
think more of it was just this sense of disappointment from Nynaeve and Elaine that they weren't held as heroes, but not that they were really being treated unfairly or unjustly. Just they didn't get the reception they expected, so they were a bit surprised by it.
It's got to feel pretty oppressive to Nynaeve and
Oh
Elaine.
yes,
Even though from the Aes Sedai's perspective, it's not just that they're trying to reassert control over Accepted, although part of it probably is that. I think you brought up many valid reasons why they need to just confirm what they're hearing and also to be circumspect in their reactions. That all makes sense. Um, and again, it still is just mature of Nynaeve to want to stick around because I probably would have left. I think I would have been cowardly about it and decided that I could learn better by myself anyway, or something like that.
because they
Um,
have proven themselves very capable. Yet at the same time,
yeah.
I think being kind of sat down and scolded did. Uh, I don't know. Maybe the Aes Sedai could read them well enough to tell we can bring them down a notch. But if we bring them down too far, they're going to fight back. So we'll just take them just this far.
Mm,
I don't know that, but it,
perhaps.
it makes it makes me wonder because as a general rule, and again, I know this is generalities, women tend to read nonverbal clues or cues about a person better than men do. If you have a situation where you have women who have done this for a couple of 300 years, they are probably very good at it. And
Mm,
yeah, they I think they had a clue to again to bring these girls down to get their heads out of the clouds, get their feet back on the ground, but knowing that they
yeah.
were so used to being independent, we can only bring them so far. So they that brought their feet back down to the ground, but didn't beat them into the ground, so to speak. Now, again, that I may be overanalyzing that. It makes me think of it. Um, and Nynaeve does still have this strong thirst for knowledge, especially of healing. I mean, she this such a strong desire to heal, to fix things, just as she did on the ship. You know, she began with Uno and some of the other soldiers, the Shinarans, who had wounds, and she begins healing them both with the herbs and with the power, and seeing people in this bad of shape made her angry enough to channel. And then when she's
Mm.
sitting there, looking at Siwan and Liana, there's almost a despair within her in seeing women who've been stealed, in knowing what's missing, what's gone from their lives. Um, and her first
Yeah.
desire is, I want to fix it. Ooh, I wonder what that looks like. And starts probing around until someone notices that
Mhm.
she's embraced the source. And of course, the Aes Sedai would notice it. Again, Nynaeve and subtlety are walking in totally opposite directions. They've never even shaken hands. So what she
Yeah.
thinks is tiny, probing of something is, I'm sure it looked like she was about to set Siwan on fire or something. So, so they were all, they shut that down in a hurry. Um, but she just has such a desire to fix things. And then, well, here's this yellow sister over here. I forget the name, but one who is has been teaching healing for years and years and years, and she just has such a desire to learn from them. So I don't think she's happy there. I don't think this is what she wanted. Certainly not the reception either one of them wanted. But I think her desire to help people is so strong that she just knows this is where she needs to be right now. And again, she's as bad as Tom. She's not going to stay in one place for very long. She's not going to remain here. Of course, she doesn't know this right now, but yeah, she won't be there forever. But she will have quite a bit to learn from them in the meantime. And and even though they don't have any plans on breaking the rules right now, they start breaking the rules long before they get out of Saladar. So we could trust they're going to do what they have to do uh, to get away with it. But yeah, they're going to do things they're not supposed to do. That's the nature of our heroes.
Of course. I do like that even though they've been cowed a little bit by the Aes Sedai into sticking around, and he still she still tries exerting some power, and I think she does this privately with Suwan, who of course is really low on the pecking order now, so she has the capability of doing this with her. Suwan approaches her to try to get access to this training in Tel'aran'rhiod and use the Tel'aran'rhiod for that and everything. Is reluctant to do this, of course, realizing that she could be walked all over. And I think she might have learned some of her negotiation skills from Elaine, perhaps, and decided that she has something she could try to gain from this, and she could actually make this exchange work. Um, it's a little different from like the Sarandon situation where Elaine had to try explicitly to teach Nynaeve some negotiation skills, but Nynaeve is getting better at this. It's not just like I'm gonna get my way no matter what. She's willing to make a trade here
Right.
so that she can um, make sure that she's not just going to lose access to these Terran So I think that was smart of her. She has decided to stick around, and she's going to kind of squeeze out of this situation whatever she can, which I don't really blame her for. I mean, those were pretty much the extent of my notes on this chapter.
Yeah.
Was just noticing the power struggles, honestly, and seeing how Nynaeve negotiated that. The fact that she decided to stay and not run away from the Aes Sedai, and the fact that she decided to try and negotiate with Siwan instead of just being walked all over.
Yeah.
I think both of those were interesting. So, um, I don't normally like the Saladar plot, but it was interesting to mine something good out of like Nynaeve's character development out of this. So I'm eager to see whether these chapters that I don't normally like about Saladar hold some more treasures like this for the future ones.
And it's odd. I like the Saladar story arc basically until they leave Saladar and are on the march to Tarv Island, because
Mhm.
to me that takes way too long. And and
Yeah.
we're getting into other parts of the story that everyone lovingly refers to as the slog. But yeah, at this part in Saladar itself, I like this part of the story. A lot of people don't, and I don't know. I guess it's just differences of opinion of what we would focus in on. But to me, I have a lot of good memories of the things that happen here. So
Oh, good.
I
Maybe we can bring some balanced commentary to it then.
no, anytime I have a difference of opinion with a woman, I usually discover just how wrong I am. But sorry, a little Two Rivers humor there. Well, I do look forward to getting into the rest of the Saladar story arc. And believe it or not, next week we're still going to be in the fires of heaven. So I hope you'll all join us next time, episode 15. We'll finish up the fires of heaven with chapters 54 and 55.
Yes, you heard it right, folks. That those are our final chapters in the Fires of Heaven, Nynaeve's point of view. Then we'll move on to Lord of Chaos. So I'm looking forward to that. Although I think we'll still be in Saladar. So I don't know that we'll feel a big change going from one volume to the next, but it'll be nice to just pull out a different book from the bookcase after a couple of months. Wheel of Mind is written by Lajara and Giskel and produced by me, Lajara. Our original theme music was composed by Wendigo. You can find his new Lairs EP on SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube, and those links will be in the description. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the Wheel of Mind, but this is an ending. To catch a beginning next time an episode drops, subscribe to Wheel of Mind on Podbean, Stitcher, iTunes, or Spotify. You can also find our episodes on YouTube under the channel name Lajara Dane. That's LaJaradayne. To leave feedback, rate and review on whichever platform you use to listen to us, or contact us at lajaradane@gmail.com or at mind_wheel on Twitter. To support the show, subscribe to us on Patreon by visiting patreon.com/wheelofmind.